Right. Of course, the one on everyone's mind right now is presidential immunity. And there's a lot that goes into this. The court here decided that the president doesn't have absolute immunity, but is immune from prosecution concerning acts that are within the president's core constitutional duties.
All
Now,
right.
at first blush, right, first reaction to this, it almost seems redundant, right? You're saying that you can be prosecuted for crimes, but you cannot be prosecuted for crimes that are within your core duties constitutionally as president. Well, are your core duties as president ever illegal? When would that scenario even really arise, right? They're saying that if it's within the core constitutional duties, you can't prosecute it. But you would think that anything that's a crime wouldn't be within the core duties in the first place.
Right. And I think what it's going to do is people are going to use it to start debating every little instance. Like, was this a core constitutional duty or was this a personal
Right.
duty?
But when is a crime really a core constitutional duty? That's really the part about it doesn't make any sense. Now, I
Right.
understand some of it because we talked about months ago, I think, when the Trump lawyers filed their papers in this case. And we talked about them saying anything that's within the outer bounds of the president's duties are protected. Remember, they were saying that even stuff
Right.
outside the core duties, but anything within the outer bounds. But we talked about certain instances where there probably is immunity, right? For example, acts of war. You know, there has been talk about prosecuting George W. Bush for war crimes, prosecuting Obama for war crimes. But what would happen realistically, even before this decision? What would have happened if someone tried to bring them up on charges for war crimes while they were president? You would, I think, easily predict the courts would say the president does have immunity in that case, right? I can't see any court in the US throwing Obama or Bush behind bars for alleged war crimes. I just can't see that. I think what they would say is your remedy is impeach the president or vote out the president, but this is a political question. We're not going to do this. And so I always kind of, even without it being black letter law, Supreme Court doctrine, I always kind of felt and had that intuition that certain things a president does are not going to be subject to prosecution.
Yeah. But at the same time, the question has come up, and there was a clip, I believe, of one of Trump, one of the but I think it was Trump's lawyers and Sotomayor, and talking about if the president decides to go after his political rival, would that be under immunity or personal? And then the lawyer was saying, well, it depends on, this and that. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
where we're going to have a real issue,
Right.
because that's going into, you know, dictator territory.
Sure.
That's going into territory that we have overthrown governments for other governments for,
Yeah. And I
you
believe the
know.
lawyer at the time was saying that you can only prosecute if he's already been impeached or something like that. He had some weird response to that, which didn't really make
Right.
much sense. But no, you're right. There is a question now of, okay, so what does this mean? How is it going to be applied? Um, okay, so we talked about maybe in an act of war that would be considered the president's duties, but now what if he's assassinating a private citizen? What if it's an American citizen? Is that ever considered within his core constitutional duties? I just can't kind of square the two, right? If it's constitutional, how are you saying that it's also illegal and barred from prosecution, right? Your core constitutional duty should never really be illegal,
Right.
And the other thing is,
And the president shouldn't be able to assassinate
well,
rivals. Like
no,
we
absolutely not. That's what I'm
we're
saying.
not.
Any crime, if you were to do that, if you were to really do that, how could you argue that that's within his core constitutional duties? he's blatantly committing a crime. That's why this whole decision is kind of weird from the perspective of if it's within your core duties, it shouldn't be illegal in the first place. So why should you need immunity from it?
Right.
Right? But here's the thing also, when you're talking about elections, because so much of this is about, okay, overturning or trying to overturn the result of the 2020 election, or as it relates to the hush money case, trying to get elected in 2016, right? How is it that what you do to influence the result of an election, how is it that that is within your core duties as president? Because when you campaign for any office, you're not even allowed to use government resources. That's separate and distinct from your duties as an elected official, right?
Right.
Anything relating to trying to win an election is outside the bounds of your duties as an official,
Right.
as a president, right? And so any of this stuff concerning the elections should be considered outside the president's core constitutional duties. However, there is language in this decision that's alarming, because it talks about, well, when he was talking to, I think it was the acting attorney general, that is within the core constitutional duties. Even if he's talking to the acting attorney general about the result of an election or trying to get the votes to win an election, how is that within your duties? I mean,
Right.
maybe if you're being charitable here, to the extent of ensuring the integrity of all of our elections as Americans or something like that. But specifically when you're talking about trying to make sure that the votes are found for you to win, how is
Right.
that within your core duties? That's you as a private person campaigning for the office. That's separate from you acting as president.
Right. Right. And you know, just even the act of doing that ask is using your position and your influence in the office to try to influence an election. Like that clearly
Right,
isn't shouldn't be something that's in their core constitutional duties to make sure you remain in office.
right, right, right. Yeah, that's not why we
Influence
elect.
to overturn the will of the people. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
right. And it's funny, right? They say core constitutional duties, really? To subvert the Constitution, right? To throw out the
right.
Constitution is within your core constitutional duties? Really? That doesn't make any sense.
No,
So, and so, to take a step back, I understand some of the premise here on paper, right? Let's not misquote me and say I agree with the decision. I understand some of the idea behind, on some level, the president is going to be immune from prosecution, but if they're acting within their duties, they're not committing crimes, and so you
right,
also need to say that.
right,
Again, okay, maybe acts of war, certain narrow things, but if you read the decision, they went much broader than that. It wasn't as narrow as that. Again, they're saying talking to the acting attorney generals within your core constitutional duties. I would say it really depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about your own election, it's not,
right,
but beyond that, right? Beyond that, it isn't only about the immunity. They also said that if you are going to prosecute a president, you can't introduce evidence at trial relating to their core constitutional duties. Now, that doesn't make any sense either. Because it's not about charging them at this point for that behavior. We're only bringing evidence in to prove a crime. Why is that to be excluded from trial?
right,
That's why the hush money case is being appealed now, because remember, that case did not concern anything that happened when he was in office. That was before he got elected. So how could that be his core constitutional duties? He didn't have any core constitutional duties. He wasn't in office.
right,
But because there's language in here that says that you can't even introduce evidence at trial about or relating to core constitutional duties, that now needs to be reviewed, right? Because if that came into the trial that led to the conviction, the appellate courts have to make a determination as to whether the verdict and the conviction can stand, or if that evidence that came in shouldn't have come in, and that's what led to that conviction. So it could result in a mistrial or the conviction being overturned, based on this language. Which again, why is that in there? I don't understand why you would bar evidence of what a president did while in office to prove a crime. Again, the crime isn't his core constitutional duties. This is before
right.
right? But you're just using evidence to build your case. They're saying that you can't even use that as evidence anymore.
Right. I mean, listen, let's say what it is. This is a coup. This is a coup, an internal coup, and we're watching it unfold before our eyes. I mean, this is all centered around Trump, and why he gets this much loyalty is unfathomable. But I think it also deals with the ideology that he represents, that side and those extremists have been fighting for decades. And this is a means to an end for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just think of an analogy to any other case, right? For example, we have free speech, right? We know that everyone has freedom of speech in the US, so you cannot be prosecuted for your speech, generally speaking, right? Of course, there's exceptions to everything, but as a general rule, you can't be prosecuted for your speech. But if you're prosecuted for another crime, right, the prosecutors can still bring in your speech to prove that crime, things that you've said. They do it all the time, right?
Right,
But in this case, they're saying you can't prosecute for a core constitutional duty, and also you can't introduce evidence of their actions, of their behavior, of their speech, even as it relates to their core constitutional duties. You can't even talk about it at trial, right?
right.
I mean, to me, that's a bridge way too far.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is a bridge way too far. And it look, they're setting it up to wiggle out of, certain things. That this idea of holding a president accountable, specifically holding Trump. I mean, let's be clear that or honest that this is all because of, the stuff Trump did while in office, breaking the norms, breaking the traditions, breaking the rules, and getting away with it.
Right.
And the GOP are complicit with it because one, well, two, he basically kind of holds the party hostage now, but also because they're getting what they wanted all these decades. So they're willing to upend everything to do it.
Yeah. The liberal justices on the court, of course, dissented. It was a 6-3 decision. The liberal justices are raising some of those concerns that how can anyone be above the law, and doesn't this incentivize any president
Absolutely
to
does.
breaking the law or testing the bounds of the law in a way they never would have before? Of course, we're in uncharted waters here. Was Nixon going to be prosecuted for crimes relating to Watergate? Maybe, right? Ford pardoned him, so we never went down that road.
Right.
So we never had to deal with this as a country before. And now we are for the first time. And yeah, these liberal justices are raising that concern while already saying now that the president is basically king. They can do whatever they want. The conservative majority is looking at it obviously from a different perspective. They're, at least from what they're saying, they're concerned about prosecutors going after presidents or former presidents every time that they leave office if they're from the other party, right? Basically going after them as political retribution.
Yeah, and but that's gaslighting in and of itself because it's first of all, it's not happened.
Right.
And the only ones before this that went after a president was the conservatives when they went after Clinton, which was fine because he did perjure himself. And so yeah, that's fine.
And by the way, I just want to, on that point, I think I mentioned it before, but I want to say again, I went back and I watched the Clinton deposition, and they specifically asked him, do you know that if you commit perjury, you are subject to criminal penalties? And he said, yes, I do. He never said at that deposition, oh, the president is immune. He didn't
Right.
claim immunity. He said, yeah, if I commit a crime, I'm liable. He admitted that on record.
Right. And so you know, the only reason why people are going after Trump is not because they're going after political rivals, it's because of the things that he did that he needed to be held accountable for. And what a lot of people are missing is if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the people that were deciding some of these cases, first of all, Biden doesn't control the cases.
Right.
And some of these were Trump appointees that even looked at it and said, hey, this is not cool, this is not right. This isn't a case of going after political rivals. If any party would do such a thing, it would be the GOP, the current GOP under Trump, who have been talking about we're going to file articles of impeachment against Biden when Biden hasn't done anything. But they just wanted to do it just because, like, well, you're doing it to ours, we're doing it to yours, or whatever the case may be. And this is a big problem.
Well, that
This,
is what the Supreme Court says that they're concerned about, what you just described, right? In
yeah,
the future, people prosecuting former presidents as a political mechanism. I'll say this, though. While I think the numbers show that most Americans do believe he is guilty of these crimes,
right,
you also see polls saying that majorities of people believe that the prosecutions are at least in part politically motivated. I saw a poll in New York that said that I think it was 64%, somewhere in that range of people in New York. Again, this is a very democratic state, not going to vote for Trump, but they're saying that they believe that that hush money trial was a political hit job.
yeah, and that's a problem, I think, because again, then that means people are looking past accountability. They're looking past what he actually did.
Right. Right.
And
Especially
they're
when
just
they're saying that they do believe he's guilty. Well, then shouldn't that
right,
kind of end the conversation? Because what you're kind of saying that
right,
people are guilty, but they shouldn't be prosecuted for it. I mean,
right,
you would think they would want someone, especially someone in that position who committed felonies, to be held accountable for it.
right. I mean, and not just felonies, 34 felonies. We're talking about a pile of felonies, and they're
Right.
not even done yet. There's
Right.
still many more charges against him.
Right.
Uh, and so yeah, that's a problem. It's kind of reeks of apathy. It kind of reeks of
Cynicism.
people just I don't know what other words. Apathy is one of the things. But it's definitely a problem. We look at the president and hold the president, even the president, accountable, even though they're holding that office, if they do something wrong, if
Right.
they commit crimes. We shouldn't want our president to commit crimes.
What I think it tells you is that most people think that all presidents essentially commit crimes because they're saying, yeah, we think he's guilty, but we also think it's a political hit job that, it's like selective prosecution. So,
Right,
right, that means that they're so cynical that they think that it's the norm for presidents
right,
to commit crimes, right? It's not
right.
even out of the ordinary. It's just, yeah, of course he did it, but still, right?
And maybe it's that it's not fully understood the depth of what he has done. So people don't see the difference or see the change or see the issue, what he's done. Like, yeah, okay, so he did that, but I don't see the big deal or whatever it is. I don't know how well it's being communicated, the issues that he has caused or whatnot. So like, for example, stacking the courts with these over 200 judges in the Supreme Court and how that's going to affect people for 30, 40 years down the line. I don't think most people really understand that that's the case.
Right.
You know, like
Well, if they
that
did,
fundamentally changes how the country uh, is run.
yeah. No, if they did understand that better, the overwhelming coverage of the debate wouldn't be about Biden stutter and cold, right? It would be about this policy we're talking of and the dire consequences for the country over the next
Right,
many generations. And
right,
I even saw something earlier that said if most of the pundits on TV were not white, the discussion would be a lot different. They would be talking about the blatant racism that you saw
yeah,
coming out of Trump's mouth during the debate, as opposed to
absolutely,
Biden's stutter, right?
absolutely,
So
yeah.
let's talk about that a bit because
Well,
I
before we
know,
get into that, though,
yeah,
before we get into that, on this last point, I just wanted to bring up this presidential immunity uh, ruling and this question. There was a tweet that went out from Biden, and he said, "I will respect the limits of presidential powers that I have for 3.5 years, but any president, including Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor. With fear, our democracy, I dissent. So do I."
Right.
So here's the issue that people are having, and I confess that I have the same thing. At this point, this means Biden has these powers that the court has just said that the president has, right? This immunity. But Biden's saying he won't use them, even if it means protecting our democracy. And so people are like, listen,
Is that what his
basically,
quote was? I won't use it even if it means protecting our democracy.
he says, I will respect the limits of presidential powers that I have for 3.5 years, which means he's not going to go and do the things that
Okay,
we know Trump will do when he
right.
gets in and
But
knows
he's
he's
saying that he's not going to do that because he believes in democracy, though, right? He's
right,
saying that you're trying to turn this into a dictatorship, into a
right,
fiefdom or what have you, right? I'm saying I still believe in democracy, and so I don't
right,
believe in immunity. I just do whatever I want.
right. The issue that people are having is like, we get that, but is now really the time for principles
What him to
because
do?
do this,
What do you want him to do?
just go in and just go ham because now he doesn't have immunity.
Like
This is what
what?
people
Like,
are
what's
talking
he
about.
supposed to do? You want to start committing crimes? Like, what do you want him to do? Why would you want
Well,
that?
that's what people are saying. Like, why can't you do something now? You have these unlimited powers or whatever it is, or
Well, hold
protection.
on a second.
You
But
can
see,
go after your
people are getting that wrong though, because it's not unlimited powers. We're seeing, in fact, we just talked about
right,
the Chevron case. We're
right,
seeing
right,
the presidential power actually be shrunk. He has less
right,
powers. We're seeing his student loan action being overturned, and
right.
so the Supreme Court is actually saying the president has no powers except for the fact that we can't prosecute them. That's the only power he has. So I think people are wrong to say you have these unlimited powers now. No, you really have no powers. The only power that you have now that you didn't have the other day was you can't be prosecuted for your core constitutional acts, however the court interprets that. But so to me, that's just saying you want him to go commit crimes. That's what is he supposed to do?
They want him to go commit basically or get heavy-handed in protection of the democracy to prevent Trump from getting on to prevent Trump from getting elected.
How do you
Do
do
whatever
that?
you have the ability to do, even if it is not something that you should be doing. Do that to prevent that because we're at the precipice here.
I
That's
don't
what that.
understand what people are asking specifically for him to be doing.
All right.
Uh, you know,
Yeah, I've seen some people are just like, well, why don't you, let me see. I don't see.
are they calling for political violence? Because I don't think anyone should be calling for that.
Some are like, well, why don't you just go ahead and lock him up, or why don't you take him out, or why don't
You
you?
can't lock him up because he has immunity. They just said that you can't, basically. I mean, there
Right,
is a system, there's due process, right? We're seeing the system play out. We don't like it, but let's also keep in mind that there isn't absolute immunity here. There still is the ability to go forward with these prosecutions to the extent that they're determined to not be within the core constitutional duties, right? The scary part is we don't know how that's going to be interpreted. And also, by the way, the court is saying it's up to the lower courts to decide the limits of the core constitutional duties. So, what you can prosecute for, what you can't prosecute for. However, we know that the decisions of these lower courts can be appealed and do get appealed. And so, even though they're saying it's up to you lower courts down there to make that, what if they make those decisions and appeals happen and it goes back up to the US Supreme Court and they say, oh no, you guys got it wrong when you decided that. So it's like they're saying, we're telling you lower courts you can decide it, but then they could also say, you guys got it wrong when you decided this way. You should have decided it that way, right? And so that can, number one, cause further delays, right? Because it's like this ping pong game happening now. It can go back up, they send it back down, it can go right back up. And also, they can look at these issues and say, as they've kind of hinted at and laid the groundwork for here, that the core constitutional duties, as they see it, are very expansive. And the immunity runs much deeper than we would expect it to run.
right. So people are calling for Biden to stop playing by the old rules because the GOP is not playing by those rules. That fairness, that balance, that respect full of politics. That we know that the GOP isn't playing by those rules. Here's one of the tweets here. President Biden can't be the nice guy anymore. He needs to fight, because if he doesn't start playing hardball right now and the Republicans gain control in any way, America and every ideal our parents, grandparents, and great-parents, grandparents fought was for nothing. Please make sure he gets this message.
That's fine, but they're still not giving any specifics as to how they want him to act in regards to this case. And that's a little scary to me because it seems to suggest that they're saying they want him to break the law because he can't be prosecuted for it now.
I think some people are saying that if it's in order to make sure we don't lose the democracy.
It's
And
kind
I
of
think
crazy though, right? Because what they're saying is you're throwing out democracy for the sake of
to protect democracy.
yeah,
The point
yeah,
is, because I think, and you know, it's not, it's crazy to say, but at the same time, we have to recognize that if Trump takes office again, that's exactly what he's going to do.
right.
That's exactly what the GOP is going to do. And everyone sees it. We all know it. Biden knows it. All the Democrats know it. The public knows it. That they're going to get in and they're not going to follow the rules. They're going to bend the rules the way that they want them to be bent. And we've seen them do it. They've been doing it through the courts. And so at some point, people want the Democrats to get on the offensive and using whatever they can in order to make sure this type of future doesn't happen. It's not, just posting a dissent or posting a statement about how you disagree with the decision isn't enough to say it. What can you do? Do something. And
Right.
that was actually trending on Twitter
Something, sure.
yesterday. Was
That's
do
a
something.
wholesome measure. Do something, but
Yeah.
I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that if we're battling for the soul of our democracy, we don't want to be the ones that we say we're fighting against, right?
Right, and that's a big philosophical point, right? Like, do we lose the whole country by holding our principles, or do we sacrifice one of the principles in order to save the country temporarily? Or temporarily sacrifice a principle to save the country?
In doing so, you're actually also losing the country. If you're saying we're going to throw out democracy, we're going to throw out the rule of law, we're going to throw out the Constitution, and we're going to say we're going to use this Supreme Court decision, which we say we disagree with, but we're going to use it to do things that are contrary to the core principles that we believe in, that we believe are essential to what makes this country great or what makes a country this country, then you've already lost the country at that point.
But isn't that very idealistic when we know that if Trump gets in, he's definitely going to do that?
So why would you want to beat him to the punch? That's basically what you're saying. Saying we're going to do the same thing he's doing before he can do it. So
to try to prevent him
better than him.
from doing that. To try to prevent him from doing that.
At that point, you know better than him. You're doing the same thing he's doing.
True. But if you're doing it to prevent that downfall,
but you've actually
you trigger the downfall to prevent the bigger downfall. If he somehow is able to,
I don't think we want to go down that road. I really don't think we don't want to encourage the president to commit crimes. We don't want to do that.
I get that. Absolutely.
Right.
I think we're one election away from that being happening.
Fight more, yes, right? But don't take this case and say, as much as we disagree with this case, we want the president to use it, because what that's saying is we want the president to be a criminal. We should never want the president to be a criminal.